Voice of Change News.
This is Voice of Change Radio News. I'm Amanda Kumalo. A quick look at stories making the headlines. Vision 2030 to be achieved ahead of schedule. Upper middle income status visible by 2028. In business news, Zim UAE firm seal 1.5 billion carbon credits deal. In regional and international news, British academic recruited Mumba for regime change mission. In sports news, DeMbare get caps in Chibuku semis. The news in detail. Zimbabwe's national vision of becoming an upper-middle income society by 2030 will be realized 2 years ahead of schedule in 2028, President Mnangagwa has said. President Mnangagwa said he was optimistic that the country would expedite the foundational and phenomenal development being experienced on all fronts. Since the commencement of his second term of office, the president has reiterated the need for Zimbabwe to increase production and productivity across all sectors to ensure the achievement of set targets and goals. Consequently, President Mnangagwa described the next 5 years as decisive in the country's development trajectory. Moving on to business news. Global Carbon Investments, a trailblazing green investments vehicle based in the United Arab Emirates, has signed a 1.5 billion memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife to unlock the value of Zimbabwe's carbon sinks and carbon mitigation measures. The money is for financing the development and sale of future carbon credits in the form of internationally transferable mitigation outcomes aligned with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. In this pioneering agreement with GCI, Zimbabwe will be propelled to the forefront of such ITMO-based financial facilities, the first of its kind within the African continent. In news beyond our borders, a British academic was at the center of the European Union plot to derail the country's democratic processes in last month's elections, working closely with a willing SADC member state that is sympathetic to the opposition. This news crew learned how the SADC election observer mission and the country's opposition were pawns in the European Union EU grant scheme to effect regime change in the country. To disguise its regime change agenda, the EU recruited elements in the SADC region, in particular the SADC Election Observer Mission, which was led by Dr. Nevers Mumba, a former vice president of Zambia who turned out to be a willing true of and for the Western world's devious agenda. Working closely with Dr. Mumba was a British academic, Professor Stephen Chan, a so-called expert on African affairs, who was, according to diplomatic sources, working closely with Dr. Mumba was British academic Professor Stephen Chan, a so-called expert on African affairs, who was, according to diplomatic sources, working with a named SADC head of state. And finally, in sports news, a third Harare derby will take place in the Chibuku Super Cup semi-final after Dynamos and Caps United were paired in a last-four draw yesterday. The other semi-final will pit Black Rhinos against Ngeze Platinum, two teams at the opposite ends of Castle Lager Premier Soccer League. Yesterday's draw was conducted at Baba Fields soon after the final quarter-final of the weekend between Highlanders and Caps United. Dynamos were first out of the pot while Black Rhinos came out second, although this had nothing to do with hosts and visitors. The Premier Soccer League will determine the venues, although it looks like the National Sports Stadium and Baobab will be used for the matches. That brings us to the end of this bulletin.
Voice of Change News.